I live in Santa Barbara now, in a quiet stucco house at the end of a cul-de-sac where the jacaranda blooms stain the sidewalk purple every spring. The morning everything became clear. I was standing at my kitchen counter, sealing little plastic pouches of sunscreen and motion sickness bands for my grandchildren. I had lined them up in a neat row beside the coffee maker, each one labeled in my handwriting with a white adhesive strip I bought in a pack of 50 from an office supply store. What I remember most about that night is the sound in the room. The dishwasher had just clicked into its drying cycle. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a neighbour's sprinkler knocked in, that steady little rhythm sprinklers make when they've been set too wide and keep hitting the fence. My phone lit up at 10:58 p.m. I didn't think much of it at first. My son, Daniel, had a habit of texting late when he was packing for something or trying to remember details he should have handled hours earlier. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, picked up the phone, and read the message once without really absorbing it. Then I read it again. You won't be joining us. Claire wants to keep the trip just for her side of the family. You've already helped enough by covering it. There are certain sentences that don't sound real the first time you read them. They sit on the screen like they belong to someone else's life. I stood there with my glasses low on my nose, one hand still resting on the edge of the counter, and I waited for the second message. Something softer. Something that corrected the first one. A call, maybe, even an awkward explanation. Another message came instead. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. I set the phone face down beside the sink. At the time, I noticed something very small and very ordinary. The tape dispenser I'd been using to close the souvenir bags had collected a thin strip of lint along its metal edge. I peeled it off with my thumbnail and dropped it in the trash. I don't know why I remember that. Maybe because my body had already decided to keep moving while the rest of me was still catching up. For nearly 4 years, I had been building that trip, not just planning it, building it. I had a separate account for it at the bank downtown. Nothing complicated, just a travel account I opened under my own name after I retired from the district office. I used to joke that I knew how to stretch a dollar because I had spent 28 years making school purchasing requests look reasonable to people who had never sharpened a pencil in a public classroom. I knew what things cost. I knew what they cost later if you delayed them. I knew how to keep records. That had always been my nature. So when I decided I wanted to take the family to Maui, I did it carefully. I skipped things. Small things mostly. I cancelled 2 streaming subscriptions. I stopped ordering takeout on Fridays. I took on remote editing work for an education publisher, a few evenings a week. Some months, I deposited $400 into the account. Some months it was less, but I kept the ledger anyway. Date, amount, source, category, airfare, villa deposit, transportation, excursions, meal reserve. The paperwork already had my name on it. That mattered later. At the time, it just felt like love in spreadsheet form. I had chosen Maui because my late husband, Robert, and I spent our honeymoon there when we were too young to afford the things people do there properly. We split one suitcase. He got sunburned on the second day and insisted he was fine, though he walked around the room that night with a hotel towel draped over his shoulders like a cape. I can still hear him saying, "Don't laugh, Ellie. I'm suffering with dignity here." I had wanted the grandchildren to see the same water. I had wanted Daniel to remember who he had been before life, turned him into someone who sent news like that by text message. When Claire married into the family, I tried, genuinely tried, to make room for her preferences. She liked things clean and scheduled and coordinated. I can respect that. I'm a person who alphabetizes manuals in a drawer. But over the years, her preference for order had a way of hardening into rank. There was always a center to whatever she planned, and I was rarely in it. At Thanksgiving, she seated me at the far end because, as she put it, the kids need to be near the kitchen traffic. At Christmas one year, Everyone wore matching cream-colored sweaters for photos. I wasn't told until I arrived in navy blue. Once, at a birthday dinner for my oldest granddaughter, she introduced me to one of her friends as Daniel's mom, with the same tone people use to identify a substitute teacher or a distant aunt who happened to be passing through. None of it was loud enough to challenge without sounding oversensitive. That's how some people operate. They rely on the fact that exclusion looks minor when viewed one incident at a time. Some people mistake silence for permission. I see that now. I didn't fully see it then. What unsettled me most that night was not Claire. I had long since understood the kind of woman she was. It was Daniel. He had allowed his name to sit above those words. He had typed them, or approved them, or at the very least decided they were acceptable to send. I turned the phone over once more and read the messages again, this time as if they were a memorandum requiring a response. No invitation, no apology, no ambiguity either. Just removal. I looked at the small carry-on I had already packed and left by the hallway bench. Inside were 2 linen dresses, my medication case, a paperback I probably wouldn't have read, and a framed photograph of Robert smiling into sunlight. I had planned to place it on the dining table one evening after dinner. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet moment. I thought maybe we would light a candle and let the children hear a few stories about him. That wasn't going to happen. I sat down at the kitchen table and pulled my old laptop toward me. It takes a moment to wake up. The fan starts first, then the screen brightens in stages. I logged into the travel account and reviewed the dashboard. Not because I didn't know what I would find, but because procedure has always been my first refuge. There it all was. The linked charges, the reservation schedules, the primary payment source, the authorization settings. And one detail I had almost forgotten appeared in the upper left corner in plain text. Primary account holder, Eleanor Hayes. Authorized users, none. That's when the room went quiet. Not literally. The dishwasher was still running. The ice maker dropped 2 cubes into the tray. But inside me, something cooled and settled into place. I did not call Daniel. I did not send a wounded message. I did not ask how long they had planned to leave me behind while still using the account I had funded. Instead, I opened the transaction settings and looked at one option I had set up years earlier because I believed in contingency planning more than trust. Freeze-linked disbursements. I rested my finger on the trackpad and read the line twice. Then a third time, slower. I didn't activate it that night. Not yet. But I printed the itinerary, opened a yellow legal pad, and wrote down the departure time, the airport check-in window, the vendor list, and the names of each service provider attached to the account. If they were going to remove me quietly, I was going to respond the same way. Through structure, through timing. Through the fact that systems, when set up correctly, do not care who feels entitled. I switched off the kitchen light a little after midnight and left the papers in a straight stack beside the laptop. Later, I realized that moment mattered more than I understood. Because that was the night I stopped trying to be included and started verifying what, exactly, still belonged to me. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual, around 5:30, before the sun had fully come up over the hills. Santa Barbara mornings have a particular kind of quiet. The marine layer sits low, the air feels a little cool and damp, and everything moves slower than it will later in the day. I made coffee the same way I always do, 2 scoops and a pinch of cinnamon, and I stood at the sink while it brewed. I didn't check my phone right away. That was deliberate, though at the time I told myself it was just habit. When I finally did look, there was no new message from Daniel. No follow-up. No, we should talk. Just a group text from Claire with a checklist about luggage weight limits and a reminder for everyone to bring copies of their IDs. Everyone. I read the message twice. My name wasn't in the thread anymore. I hadn't been removed exactly. But the way the message was written, it was clear the list didn't include me. It was written to a group that had already agreed I wasn't part of it. I set the phone down and opened the folder where I kept the trip documents. Printed confirmations, payment receipts, booking agreements, insurance forms. I'm an old school administrator. I trust paper more than promises. As I sat there flipping through the pages, a memory came back to me. Not because I went looking for it, but because paperwork has a way of pulling old scenes out of you. The first memory was from about 4 years earlier, when I first mentioned the Hawaii idea. We were in Daniel's backyard in Irvine. He was standing at the grill, turning chicken with those long metal tongs he always used, like he was conducting an orchestra. The grandchildren were running through the sprinkler, and Claire was inside arranging something on a tray that didn't really need arranging. I was drying plastic cups with a dish towel when I said, "I've been thinking maybe next year, or the year after, I could take everyone to Maui. A big family trip." Daniel looked up and laughed a little. "Mom, that's a big trip." "I know," I said. That's why I'd start planning now. Claire walked out at that moment and said, "Maui is expensive. Not excited, not curious. Just factual," like she was pointing out a problem in a proposal. "I've started a little travel fund," I said. Daniel put the tongs down and said, "You don't have to do that, Mom." But Claire said, "Well, if we ever did something like that, it would have to be very organized. I wouldn't want it to feel chaotic." At the time, I didn't think much of it. I just nodded and said, "I can be organized." I remember the smell of the grill, the sound of the sprinkler ticking back and forth, and Daniel handing me a plate and saying, "If anyone could plan a trip like that, it'd be you." That was the first memory. The second memory came when I found the villa contract in the folder. That memory was in a travel agency office about a year and a half ago. A young agent named Melissa was showing me photos of different properties on her computer screen. I had my reading glasses on and a legal pad open, writing down square footage, number of bedrooms, distance to beach access. She said, "This one sleeps 8 comfortably, maybe 10 if you use the pull-out. 8 is fine," I said. "I want everyone to have a proper bed." She smiled and said, "You must really love your family." I laughed a little and said, "I do. I just want everyone under one roof at least once, while I can still climb stairs." She turned the screen and pointed at the total estimate. I didn't flinch, but I did take a slow breath and said, "All right, let's hold this one for now." Then she said something I didn't think about again until much later. She said, "Since you're the sole payer, we'll keep everything under your authorization unless you want to add another card holder." "No," I said. "That's all right. I'll manage it." That was the second memory. The third memory came when I found the airline booking confirmations. That memory was from a Sunday afternoon, maybe 8 months ago. Daniel had called me while I was sitting in my car in a grocery store parking lot. He said, "Mom, Claire wants to know if we should extend the trip by 2 days so her parents can rest more between activities." "We can do that," I said. "I'll call the agent tomorrow and adjust the reservation." He said, "You're doing a lot for this trip." I remember I looked out through the windshield at people pushing carts in the heat and said, "It's probably the last big trip I'll plan like this. I want it to be right." He was quiet for a moment and then said, "We appreciate it." At the time, I believed that. Sitting at my kitchen table now, with the folder open and the morning light coming in through the side window, those 3 memories lined up in my mind like documents in a case file. Idea, control, payment. That's usually where authority sits, though families don't like to use that word. Around noon that day, Claire called. Her voice was light, almost cheerful, the way people sound when they're calling about logistics, not people. "Hi, Eleanor," she said. She only uses my first name when she wants something to sound formal. "I just wanted to make sure the final payment goes through tomorrow. The resort said the last charge should clear 48 hours before arrival." "Yes, I saw that on the schedule," I said. "Perfect. I just didn't want there to be any surprises. There was a small pause, and I said, "Is there anything you need me to bring for the kids?" Another pause, slightly longer this time. Then she said, "Oh, no, no. You don't need to worry about that. This trip is going to be a lot for you anyway. Long flight, all that walking. It might actually be a good opportunity for you to rest while we're gone." While we're gone, she said it gently. That was the skill she had. She could deliver exclusion in a tone that sounded like concern. "I see," I said. "We'll send lots of pictures," she added. That was the moment I understood the structure of the plan. Not just that I wasn't invited, but that they had already built a polite explanation around it. Something that would sound reasonable if repeated to other people. It would have sounded like this: "We thought the trip might be too tiring for her." We didn't want her to feel pressured. She said she was happy to stay home and rest. I had spent 28 years in school administration. I knew the sound of a narrative being prepared in advance. After we hung up, I sat at the table for a long time without moving. Not crying, not angry exactly, just reviewing. At 2:15 that afternoon, I opened the travel account again and went through each linked vendor one by one. Airline, villa, car rental, activity bookings, catering deposit, all of them tied to the same funding source, all of them requiring authorization from the primary account holder. I printed 2 more documents and added them to the folder. Then the pressure came almost immediately. "At 2 p.m., Daniel texted. "Hey, Mom. Claire said she talked to you. I hope you understand about the trip. It's just going to be easier this way. We'll plan something smaller with you later. Easier this way." I stared at that sentence for a long time. It wasn't cruel in tone. That was the problem. It was administrative, like he was moving a meeting to a different day. I typed a reply and then deleted it. Then I typed another one. "Let me know if the kids need anything for the flight." I sent that instead. He replied with a thumbs up emoji. That was the moment I stopped thinking of this as a family misunderstanding and started thinking of it as a procedural situation. Later, I realized something important. They weren't hiding the trip. They were hiding the authority. And that's a different kind of mistake. 2 days before their departure, I drove downtown to the bank on State Street. I didn't dress up for it, but I did put on a blazer. Old habits. When you walk into an institution, it helps if you look like you understand forms. The bank had that familiar smell of paper, carpet cleaner, and the faint metallic scent from the coin machines. I signed in on the small screen near the door and wrote, "Account authorization question," as the reason for my visit. A young man called my name after a few minutes and led me to a desk near the back. His name tag said Evan. He had the careful, polite tone of someone who had been trained to never assume anything and never promise too much. "How can I help you today, Miss Hayes?" he asked. I placed my folder on the desk and opened it neatly. "I just want to confirm something about a secondary account I use for travel expenses," I said. "Specifically about linked cards and authorization." He nodded and turned his monitor slightly toward me. "Sure, let's take a look." I slid the printed summary across the desk. He typed for a moment, then said, "Okay, I see the account. You're listed as the sole owner." "I thought so," I said. "And the cards linked to the travel vendors, those are drawing directly from this account?" "Yes," he said. "They're set up as automatic disbursements tied to vendor authorizations." "And if I wanted to pause those disbursements temporarily?" I asked. "How would that work?" He clicked through a few screens and then pointed to a section on the monitor. "You can place a transaction freeze on the account. That stops all outgoing charges tied to linked vendors. Nothing processes unless you manually release it." "And the cardholders?" I asked. He looked back at the screen. "They wouldn't technically be cardholders. The vendors just have authorization to charge this account. If the account is frozen, their charges decline." I nodded slowly. He added, You would still have full control. You could unfreeze it any time. I folded my hands on top of the folder and asked one more question, very calmly. Would anyone else be notified if I placed that freeze? He shook his head. No, ma'am. The system just stops the transactions. The vendor would see a declined payment, but it wouldn't specify why. They'd have to contact the account holder for authorization. That's when the banker looked up and paused. Not because he understood the whole story, but because he understood enough to recognize that this wasn't really about travel. Thank you, I said. That's exactly what I needed to know. I didn't freeze the account at the bank. Procedure matters. Timing matters more. I drove home along the coast road, rolled the window down, and let the air come in. I remember seeing a woman walking her dog and a man washing his car in his driveway. Ordinary Tuesday afternoon things. The world looked completely normal, which is sometimes the strangest part of these situations. Your life can be splitting into two versions, and the man next door is still rinsing soap off his windshield. That evening, Daniel called. Not texted. Called. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, then I answered. Hi, Mom, he said, in that careful voice people use when they know they're about to manage a conversation. Hi, Daniel, I said. He cleared his throat. Claire said she talked to you. I just wanted to make sure everything was okay. Everything is very clear, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, We didn't want you to feel overwhelmed on this trip. It's a lot of activity, and Claire's parents are used to traveling like this together, and we just thought it would be simpler. Simpler. I walked over to the kitchen window and looked out at the small lemon tree in my backyard. It had a few green lemons on it, not ready yet. Daniel, who is listed on the villa reservation? I asked. He sounded slightly confused. What do you mean? I mean, whose names are on the reservation documents, the guest list. He hesitated. I think it's me and Claire. Why? I was just reviewing the paperwork, I said calmly. I noticed something. He didn't ask what. Instead, he said, Mom, you know this trip wouldn't even be happening without you. We're very grateful. Claire is very grateful. But gratitude and inclusion are not the same thing. That's something people learn too late if they're not careful. What time is your flight on Thursday? I asked. 10, 45 inches the morning, he said. Why? I just like to keep the itinerary straight, I said. Old habits. He laughed a little, relieved the conversation had stayed in safe territory. Yeah, you and your schedules. After we hung up, I went to my desk and wrote down the flight time again on the legal pad. 10:45 a.m., departure. Airport arrival around 8:30. Check-in and vendor charges between 8:30 and 9:30. Then I opened the travel account on my laptop and navigated to the transaction control page. The freeze option was a small toggle switch in the upper right corner. Blue when active. Grey when inactive. I hovered the cursor over it but didn't click. Not yet. Because procedure isn't just about what you do, it's about when you do it. The next day, Wednesday, Claire posted a photo online of matching straw hats laid out on a bed. 8 hats. A caption underneath. Family trip ready. Family. I didn't comment. Around 7 that evening, my granddaughter called me on video chat to show me the swimsuit she had picked out. She held the phone too close to her face like children do, and I could see her missing front tooth and the excitement in her eyes. Grandma, there are sea turtles there, she said. Mom said we might see them. I hope you do, I said. Are you packed? She asked. There was a small silence then, the kind children don't notice, but adults do. I'm all set, sweetheart, I said. That wasn't a lie exactly. I was packed, just not for the same trip anymore. After we hung up, I walked into my bedroom, took the carry-on off the bench, and unpacked it slowly. I folded the dresses back into the drawer. I put Robert's photo back on the nightstand. I set the lavender candle on the dresser. Then I went back to the desk, opened the laptop, and logged into the bank one more time. I looked at the balance. I looked at the list of vendors. I looked at the departure time written on the yellow pad. Then I closed the laptop without touching the freeze button. Because there was one more thing I needed to do first. Not with the bank. With myself. That night I didn't sleep very well, but not for the reasons you might think. I wasn't crying or replaying old arguments in my head. It was more like my mind was sorting things into folders, the way I used to organize student records at the district office. When something doesn't make sense emotionally, I tend to process it administratively. Around 2:10 a.m., I got out of bed, went to the kitchen, and made a cup of tea. I didn't turn on the main lights, just the small one over the stove. The house looked different in that kind of light. Smaller, quieter, like a place where decisions get made. I sat at the table with the legal pad and wrote one question at the top of the page. What exactly am I paying for? Not emotionally, structurally. I drew a line down the middle of the page. On one side, I wrote financial. On the other side, I wrote social. Under financial, I listed everything the account was paying for: airfare, villa, rental car, activities, food deposit, insurance. Under social, I wrote something different: invitation, respect, inclusion, honesty. Then I just looked at the two lists for a long time. Sometime around 3 a.m., I remembered something Robert used to say when we were dealing with contractors, or insurance people, or school forms for Daniel when he was little. He used to say, "Ellie, always check whose name is on the paper. That's the person they have to listen to." At the time, I thought he was talking about home repairs and permission slips. Later, I realized he was talking about life. The next morning was Thursday, departure day. I woke up at 6, made coffee, and sat in the lookout chair by the front window. From there I can see the curve of the street and the jacaranda tree and the mailboxes. I sat there with my coffee and the folder beside me and waited until I knew they would be at the airport. At 8:42 a.m., Daniel texted. At the airport. Long line, but we're moving. I looked at the time, then at the legal pad. Check-in window. Vendor confirmations. Authorization holds. At 8:55, I opened the laptop and logged into the bank. I navigated to the travel account. The toggle switch was still grey. I rested my finger on the trackpad for a moment. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to be very clear with myself about what I was doing. I wasn't cancelling a trip. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was stopping payment for something I was no longer included in. That's a different thing. At 9:03 a.m., I clicked the toggle. Freeze linked disbursements. Are you sure you want to place a transaction freeze on this account? Yes. The switch turned blue. Nothing dramatic happened. No sound, no alert. Just a small color change on a screen in a quiet house. I closed the laptop and went back to the front window with my coffee. At 9:27 a.m., my phone rang. Daniel. I let it ring twice, then answered. Mom, he said, and I could hear airport noise behind him, voices and rolling suitcases, and that hollow sound big buildings have. There's some kind of problem with the card at the check-in desk. It says the payment didn't go through. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, very calmly, that's because I stopped the payments this morning. Silence on the line. Not static, not noise, just silence. Mom, he said slowly, what do you mean you stopped the payments? I mean, I froze the travel account, I said. The vendors can't draw from it right now. Why would you do that? We're standing at the counter. They're saying the tickets aren't fully released until the final payment clears. I picked up the legal pad and looked at the list I had written at 2 in the morning. Financial. Social. Daniel, I said, who is on this trip? He exhaled, the way people do when they are trying not to sound irritated in public. Mum, we talked about this. We just thought. No, I said quietly. You told me. You didn't ask me. And you didn't include me. There was a long pause. I could hear Claire's voice somewhere near him, asking what was happening. Mom, he said again, lower this time, you're putting us in a very difficult position right now. And that was the moment everything became very clear to me. I was already in a difficult position, I said. I just handled mine before you noticed. More silence. Then Claire's voice came onto the line. Eleanor, I don't think this is the right time to discuss this. We're at the airport with the children. You're right, I said calmly. This is the time to make decisions. The discussion already happened. You just didn't include me in it. She didn't answer right away, so I explained it in the simplest possible way. The account that pays for this trip is in my name, I said. The contracts are in my name. The authorizations are in my name. If I am not included in the trip, then the account is not included in the trip. That's when the room went quiet. Not my kitchen this time. Their airport counter. Daniel spoke again, but his voice sounded different now. Less confident, less administrative. What are we supposed to do right now? He asked. That's up to you, I said. You can book a trip that matches the guest list. Or you can change the guest list to match the person paying for the trip. Claire said something in the background I couldn't quite hear, but I heard the word hotel and the word card and the word call. Then Daniel said, very quietly, can you unfreeze it? I looked down at the legal pad again. At the two columns, financial, social, I can, I said. But we're not talking about money right now. We're talking about position. There was a long pause. Long enough for him to understand that this was no longer about a vacation. It was about structure. And structure, once you see it clearly, is very hard to argue with. There's a particular kind of silence that happens when people realize a situation is no longer emotional, but procedural. You can almost hear the shift, even over a phone line in a crowded airport. When Daniel spoke again, his voice had changed. It wasn't the voice he used when he was explaining something to me. It was the voice he used when he was trying to understand something he hadn't expected to have to understand. Okay, he said, slowly. Okay, just tell me what you want us to do. That sentence mattered more than any apology could have in that moment. I didn't answer right away. I walked over to the kitchen table, sat down, and opened the folder again, even though I already knew what was inside it. Paper has a way of keeping conversations calm. I'm not trying to ruin your trip, I said. I want you to hear that clearly. I planned this trip because I wanted us to spend time together as a family. All of us. Under one roof. That was the whole point. Claire was very quiet now. I could hear airport announcements in the background, something about boarding groups. But somewhere along the way, I continued, the trip changed. And I wasn't told, I was reassigned. From participant to sponsor, and I wasn't included in that decision. Daniel didn't interrupt this time. So here's where we are, I said. The reservations, the flights, the villa, they're all under my authorization. If I'm not on the guest list, then the authorizations don't make sense. Structurally, it doesn't make sense. I heard Claire say, very quietly but very clearly, put it on speaker. There was a rustling sound, and then she spoke directly. Eleanor, she said, in that same careful voice she always used when she wanted to sound reasonable. This doesn't have to become a big situation. We just thought the trip would be more comfortable this way. For everyone. For everyone, I repeated. Yes, she said. Traveling with two older people can be complicated, and my parents. I am not an extra chair that makes the table crowded, I said, still calm. I am the person who built the table. There was a long pause after that. Sometimes one sentence rearranges the entire conversation. Daniel spoke again, and now he sounded tired. Not angry, not defensive, just tired in the way people sound when they realize a plan is collapsing. If we add you back to the reservation, he said, can you unfreeze the account? I didn't say yes immediately, not because I wanted to prolong anything, but because I needed them to understand the order of things. This isn't about adding me as a favor, I said. It's about correcting a structure that never made sense to begin with. Claire said, the villa only has so many rooms. The villa sleeps 8, I said. I have the contract in front of me. Silence again. That was one of those moments when paperwork speaks louder than opinions. Finally, Daniel said, okay, just give us a little time. We need to talk to the airline desk and the villa manager. I'll be here, I said. We hung up and I placed the phone on the table next to the folder. Then I went outside and watered the plants. Not because the plants desperately needed water, but because sometimes your body needs to do something normal while your life rearranges itself. About 40 minutes later, Daniel called back. Okay, he said. We changed the reservation. Your name is on the flight now. The villa added a rollaway in the downstairs study, but it's still a proper room with a bathroom. They said it's fine. I closed my eyes for a moment, not out of relief exactly, but out of recognition. Recognition that structure had done what emotion could not. Send me the updated confirmation, I said. A few minutes later, the email came through. I opened the attachment and read it line by line. Passenger list. Daniel Hayes, Claire Hayes, Eleanor Hayes, guest registry updated. That's when everything changed. Not because my name was on a document, but because the position had been corrected. At 10:02 a.m., I logged back into the bank account. I clicked the toggle. Unfreeze linked disbursements. Are you sure? Yes. The switch turned grey again. That was it. No speech, no lecture, no dramatic ending. Just a small administrative correction that fixed a very large personal mistake. Around noon, Daniel called again. We're through security, he said. Boarding in about 30 minutes. All right, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Mom, I didn't think about it the way you explained it. I don't know what I thought. I just thought it would be easier. I know, I said. That's usually the reason people give when they move someone out of their place. They say it's easier. He didn't argue with that. Before we hung up, he said, I'm glad you're coming. I believed him when he said it. But more importantly, I believed the paperwork. Because paperwork doesn't say things just to make a moment softer. Paperwork reflects what people are willing to put in writing. And that morning, for the first time since I started planning that trip, the structure and the story finally matched. The flight left on time. Daniel texted me a photo of the wing just before takeoff, the ocean visible through the window like a sheet of hammered metal. He wrote, See you tonight. I packed that afternoon, but much more slowly than I had the first time. Not because I was unsure anymore, but because I was paying attention to different things now. I packed one small suitcase, 2 linen dresses, a light sweater, walking shoes, my medication case, and Robert's photograph again. This time I wrapped the frame in a soft t-shirt so it wouldn't crack. At the airport, I moved through everything calmly. Check-in, security, boarding. No one stopped me. No one questioned my ticket. My name was on the list, just like any other passenger. It's a simple thing, seeing your name where it's supposed to be, but it changes how you walk through a place. When I landed in Maui, the air felt warm and heavy and familiar in a way that surprised me. I hadn't been back since Robert and I came all those years ago. The airport looked different, but the light looked the same. Soft and gold, like everything had been slightly polished. Daniel was waiting near baggage claim with the children. When my granddaughter saw me, she ran so fast her small backpack bounced against her shoulders. Grandma, you came, she said, like it had been a surprise. I bent down and hugged her and said, I was always coming. Daniel stood a few steps behind her, hands in his pockets, looking like a man who had rehearsed something to say but wasn't sure where to start. I'm glad you're here, he said again. I know, I said. And this time, we both understood that the sentence meant more than it had earlier that morning. The villa was about 40 minutes from the airport, up a winding road lined with tall grass and low stone walls. When we pulled into the driveway, I recognized the place immediately from the photos I had studied for months on my laptop. The long porch, the wide windows, the big wooden table inside. Claire met us at the door. She smiled, but it was a careful smile, the kind people use when they're adjusting to a new version of a situation. "Hi, Eleanor," she said. "Hello, Claire," I said. No one mentioned the airport. No one mentioned the phone calls. We just walked inside, like people who had agreed, without saying it out loud, to behave like adults. The room they had set up for me was the downstairs study with a proper bed brought in and a small bathroom attached. It wasn't the largest room in the house, but it had a window that looked out toward the water, and in the late afternoon, the light came in at an angle that made the whole room look calm and gold. I set Robert's photograph on the small desk near the window and unpacked my clothes into the dresser. That evening, we all sat at the long wooden table and ate takeout from containers because no one had the energy to cook after traveling. The grandchildren talked about the pool. Claire's parents talked about the flight. Daniel opened a bottle of wine and poured everyone a glass. At one point, Claire's father raised his glass and said, "This is a beautiful place. Thank you for organizing all of this." He was talking to the table in general, but he was looking at me. "You're welcome," I said. Claire glanced at Daniel for a moment, then back at her plate. That was the social lane correcting itself. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I stepped out onto the porch alone. The air smelt like salt and flowers, and I could hear the ocean somewhere in the dark. I sat down in one of the wooden chairs and thought about the last few days, about the text message, about the bank, about the toggle switch on the screen, about how close I had come to staying home while everyone else lived inside a trip I had built. Authority doesn't always look like a loud voice or a slammed door. Sometimes it looks like knowing which box to check and when to check it. The next morning, I woke up early because of the time difference and went into the kitchen to make coffee. Claire was already there, standing at the counter cutting fruit. She looked up when I walked in and said, "Good morning." "Good morning," I said. She hesitated for a moment. Then she said, quietly, "I didn't think about it from your side." I poured coffee into a mug and leaned against the counter. "I know," I said. "That was the problem." She nodded once. Not defensively. Just once, like someone acknowledging a fact. "We just thought it would be easier to manage the schedule and the rooms and everything if we kept the group smaller," she said. "And the money the same size," I said. She didn't argue with that either. After that, the trip became what it was supposed to be from the beginning. We went to the beach. We ate at noisy restaurants. The grandchildren collected shells and showed them to me like treasures. One night, we told stories about Robert at the big wooden table, and my granddaughter asked if he really wore a towel like a cape when he got sunburned. And I said yes, he did. And Daniel laughed in a way I hadn't heard in a long time. But the most important part of the trip wasn't the beach or the restaurants or the stories. It was the quiet understanding that settled over everything after the first day. Position had been clarified. And once position is clear, people behave differently. We took another trip a few months later, but this time it was different from the beginning. Not bigger, not more expensive. Just different, in a way that's hard to explain unless you've lived through something like that. This time, when the planning started, Claire called me before any bookings were made. "We're thinking about October," she said. "Somewhere quieter, maybe the coast, maybe somewhere with a big house again so everyone can stay together. What do you think?" Four small words. But they changed the entire structure of a conversation. We talked about locations for almost an hour. Not just dates and prices, but who would be comfortable with stairs, who needed a ground floor bedroom, how far the grocery store should be, whether we wanted to cook most nights or go out. Normal planning, shared planning. At one point, she said, "You're better at the logistics than I am." Do you want to handle the booking again if we all transfer our share to you first? If we all transfer our share first. Structure corrected. Yes, I said. That would be fine. And it was fine. Because now the financial lane and the social lane were moving in the same direction. No one was riding in a seat someone else paid for without acknowledging who bought the ticket. But the trip to Maui remained the trip I thought about the most. Not because of the beaches or the photos or the restaurants, but because of what it clarified. One afternoon in Maui, near the end of the trip, I was sitting on the porch with Claire's mother while everyone else had gone down to the water. She was a quiet woman, very observant, the kind of person who notices more than she says. She looked out toward the ocean for a long time and then said, "Families are complicated when money and pride sit at the same table." "That's true," I said. She nodded once and then said, "But I noticed something. When your name was mentioned in this house, everyone listened a little more carefully after the first day. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, paperwork has a way of making people listen." She smiled a little at that, like she understood exactly what I meant. Back home, life went back to normal in the way life always does. Grocery stores, doctor appointments, lemon tree in the backyard. Phone calls with the grandchildren about school projects and lost teeth and class plays, but something had shifted. Quietly, permanently. Daniel called more often, not to ask for help with something, but to ask what I was doing, or to tell me about something that had happened at work, or to ask if I wanted to come over for dinner. Not out of guilt, I think. Out of recognition. Claire included me in group messages again, but more importantly, she included me in decisions before they were finalized. Not every decision, just the ones that involved me. Which is all I had wanted in the first place. Some people think situations like that are about revenge or winning or teaching someone a lesson. It wasn't like that for me. It was about correction. Quiet correction. Some people mistake silence for permission, but silence can also be preparation. That's something you learn when you've lived long enough to see how systems work. Families are emotional, but houses, bank accounts, contracts, reservations, those things are structural. And when emotional stories and structural reality don't match, eventually one of them has to change. In my case, the structure didn't change. The behavior did. Now, most mornings, I still sit in the lookout chair with my coffee and watch the street wake up. The same neighbor walks his dog. The same mail truck turns the corner around 10:15. The lemon tree is taller than it was last year. Ordinary things. That's the part people don't always understand. After something big happens, life doesn't turn into a movie. It turns back into ordinary days, just with clearer boundaries. A few weeks ago, Daniel said something while we were having dinner at his house. It was a small thing, but I noticed it. He was telling a story to a friend who had come over, and at one point he said, "We went to Maui last year. My mum planned the whole thing. We all went together. We all went together." He didn't say it by accident. Near the end of that dinner, my granddaughter climbed into my lap and said, "Grandma, are you going to plan another trip when I'm bigger?" I smiled and said, "Maybe. We'll see." And I realized something in that moment that I hadn't fully put into words before. You can't take what was never yours. Not a house, not a seat at a table, not a person's role in their own family. All you can do is pretend for a while. But eventually, someone checks the paperwork, and when they do, things tend to return to where they were always supposed to be. If stories about quiet boundaries resonate with you, you're welcome to stay. Because not every important decision is loud. Not every correction requires a fight. And not every lesson needs to be explained in order to be understood. Some of them just need a signature in the right place, a date on a ledger, and the willingness to stop paying for things that cost you your place at the table. And once you learn that, life becomes much quieter and much clearer.